I am very excited to be joined by three excellent panelists, and I don't know if our three panelists can go ahead and show their cameras and come on screen. We've got Heidi Voorhees, Catherine Tuck Parrish, and Ron Holyfield. And when we were putting this event together, we said to ourselves, who are the top three people who know the most about what it takes to advance from his career and kind of move along in the direction that you want to go. And these three folks came to mind because they are working across the country in recruitment capacities and placement capacities with not just finance officers, but city managers, other CEOs, and other positions within local government. So they have a very comprehensive view of the entire process. So I think we're honored to have them here today to chat with us. So we are going to be covering first the learning objectives here. Is going to better preparation for the next step in your career, determine the skills necessary to advance, and things to think about to make yourself more attractive to your next employer. Now, before we get into the conversation with our three panelists, we just want a quick level setting poll question here. And so I don't know, Tammy, if you would be so kind as to activate our first poll. We want to know what position are you currently in. This kind of help us gauge where folks are at in terms of their career. All right, so we see some action here. Cool. All right. So I'd say we've probably about got it. So I'm going to end the poll, share the results. And as we can see, we've got probably we do have a majority of mid-manager followed by director, and then some entry-level folks as well. So I think that's helpful. And we will absolutely have information on that'll be relevant to all three of those levels. So thank you for that. And with that, let's get into our first question. And this first question, we're going to ask Heidi to lead off with her thoughts, and then we will get other thoughts as well. And by the way, just to jump into things, one note, if you do have any questions or comments, we do have the chat feature on these webinars, so do feel free to use it. And then also we did in the last few weeks have a conversation going in the GFWA members forum about additional questions, so we'll be looking for opportunities to work those in as we go. So with that, Heidi, if you could let us know what you think when it comes to the key skills employers are looking for.
Thank you for attending. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Heidi, a quick question here. Your audio seems to have, you're sounding good earlier when we tested, and then something has gone wrong.
Is there no audio?
You sound good now. You're like very scrambled, like just, your first attempt. So whatever you just did seems to have helped.
Okay. I didn't do anything, but hopefully this will work. Stop me if there's a problem. How's that?
You sound good now. Perfect.
Okay. Thank you again for the opportunity to talk with you about this. In case anyone on the webinar didn't know, finance directors are a very hot commodity in recruiting these days. And I would say public finance positions at all levels are highly sought after. So it's important, though, you all want to succeed once you're in those positions. So in thinking about what employers are looking for, of course, at the basic level, and you all will have this, is competence. They want you to be able to, ideally understand the public sector, but also, know your numbers, be comfortable with them. But then after that, it quickly transforms to other skills. And I would say collaboration is a big one. The ability to work with other departments and problem solve in a positive manner. Similarly, the ability to work with elected officials and to provide transparency with respect to numbers. Elected bodies are often divided these days and have they have a lot of lot of division within their own, and the folks who know the numbers can often be that fair arbiter. And we're going to talk a little bit about the finance director as a decision architect, somebody that can lead boards and organizations through difficult positions and really be that person that everyone relies upon to be fair and transparent with numbers. I think it can be fatal if you get involved in politics with respect to different elected officials. And it's important that all of the elected officials feel that they have equal access to the numbers, to transparent discussion about the budget and about the future of the finances for the organization. Ideally, presentation skills are also very important. So that is something we sometimes see, that assistant finance directors haven't had that opportunity to present before elected bodies. So acquiring that skill and practicing that skill is very important. And then the development of your team, the ability to effectively develop and lead a team of subordinates and help them reach the next level in their professional development is critical these days, because these positions are hard to fill. And they're hard to fill all the way down the organization. So being able to bring people in, develop them, anchor them to your organization is very important. And I'll stop and see if any of my colleagues have any other. I'm sure they've got some great suggestions as well.
I'll jump in. That's a great list, Heidi. I couldn't agree more with really everything that you said. I would just amplify a couple things that I did hear you say, and maybe just go just a little bit further. You talked about the ability to work with elected officials, and I think talked about the importance of consensus building. I think there is a huge role that sometimes the CFO or finance director can play, sometimes even better than the city or county manager. Because they're seen, if they're trusted and seen as an honest broker. And in addition to the communication skills that I would add is the ability to tell a story, not just with the data, but with real life examples. Most elected officials, not all, most elected officials, they have a series of anecdotes in their head. And if you can tell them something, tell a story with the numbers that includes an anecdote that they can remember, and it humanizes whatever decisions they're about to make. And the last thing I would add is kind of an equity lens. I think that more and more there are, that is going to be a skill from the financial point of view, that is going to be important. I think it's an important skill for anyone to have an equity lens, but what that means from the finances, that's what I'd add.
Yeah, I agree completely with everything that's been said. And to use Catherine's words, I'll amplify just a little bit. A couple of things that I would strongly urge. Number one is to lean into big time the work GFOA is doing with regard to rethinking budgeting. GFOA is doing some of the most profound thinking that's been done in local government in my career in terms of rethinking how decisions are made. And the reality is we are in a world in which how decisions are being made is dramatically changing. And the finance arena, finance leaders have got to begin understanding the context of those decisions. And just one very simplistic little example is that we're now in a Twitter world, and a lot of your community and a lot of your elected officials and some of your employees expect highly complex 25-year implication funding decisions to be able to resolved in 280 characters. And so what you've got to do is, instead of simply swimming upstream and going, that's stupid, which it is, but you've got to not surrender to simply saying that's stupid. You've got to say, okay, how do we effectively frame the questions to achieve understanding. And honestly, that's not always been the strong suit of the financial sector. And so there's a real mind shift in terms of how do we actually connect and communicate, not how do we simply provide accurate information.
Yeah, and one more thing I would add is a phrase that we often include is the ability to translate complex financial information to a layperson. And it doesn't mean, I mean, that layperson could be an incredibly skilled attorney or planner or whatever. This just isn't their focus in their professional world. So how can you translate that information into it? And I think we're seeing a number of communities that are doing community budgeting as well. So they're sending teams out into the community, and sometimes a ward or a district is given a certain amount of money to spend and set priorities. So there's all kinds of innovation going on with the budgeting process, and the finance professionals are going to be pulled into it. And I like Ron's phrase of leaning into it, because this is something we have to be excited about community engagement and want to do. If we fight it, it's going to be a losing battle, and it's going to harm that relationship with the elected body and the community that frankly we all serve.
All right, fantastic. So just a quick follow-up question here. So the framing of this question that we have on our screen is what are the key skills employers are looking for? And I think you guys, the answer could probably be implied from what you said here on the webinar, but I would maybe address directly what are the top attributes, meaning just give you an example, one I might take from what you said was empathy for people that are not as numerically literate, shall we say, right? And being able to frame the information in ways that might appeal to more. I think with Catherine, your great point about kind of have a story to illustrate the numbers, not to have anecdote led, decision making, but rather to say people remember the anecdote. Like one of the elected officials in my career had a kind of, I think, very memorable way of putting it. There's a narrative, how they put it? Narrative is the currency of the elected official. That's well stated. So the point being, to the extent that the finance officer can marry narrative with data is a good thing. But as far as then maybe attributes that maybe are not quite the same as skills, is there anything you would add to say here are key attributes to cultivate?
One, I would attribute two attributes I would mention. One is the ability, back to Heidi's point, to translate down to an accessible level. One city council we were doing a retreat for, big gulf between staff and council over what excellence really looked like. And it was a very sophisticated staff, a very sophisticated council, a very well-run community, minimal political engagement. And it was a huge problem until literally just in a Hail Mary pass, I got up and went to the chart paper and I listed different makes of cars. And I said, okay, when it comes to police, do you want a Mercedes or do you want a BMW or do you want a Hyundai, et cetera? And then do the same thing with parks. And this is a very sophisticated city council. And that's what it took for them to be able to actually articulate, oh, I can draw the comparison. I want to be driving a Buick with parks and a Mercedes with police. And then staff can go back and translate that. So one of those attributes is the way not just to translate outward, but to hear what the elected officials and the community are trying to say and don't necessarily know how to articulate, and then use that to develop your communications. The other, I would say, that is different, in the years when I was a city manager, you always had the stupid, for lack of a better description, that would the ignorant that would show up and say unbelievably stupid things at council meetings. You treated them with respect, but you basically ignored them. In today's world, stupid and proud of it is a substantial part of the power base. So you've got to have a higher tolerance. You've got to tolerate fools gladly at a much higher level than you used to. Because if you allow your frustration to show, or if you allow them to say, or if you allow yourself to go, well, that's too stupid to do, then what's going to happen is you're going to lose your ability to actually move things forward. So those are the two attributes that I kind of hone into, the more personal attributes that kind of resonated with me when you asked that question.
Fantastic. Heidi or Catherine, anything you want to add to that?
I think just listening skills in general, Ron touched on that, are important no matter what you're doing, these days, especially in leadership positions. I would also say presentation skills. And I mentioned that earlier, if it's not something you're comfortable with yet, it is learnable. And it is something just with practice, you can get there. And I think that does hold some people back. And a comfort level, I think Ron was talking about this too, and Catherine, a comfort level with transparency, just with hardcore transparency and being willing to sit down and go over things over and over until they're understood. But getting back to that decision architect article, which I think is great, all of that fosters trust, which is if you don't have that last pillar of trust, you aren't going to be successful at all, because they'll just, no matter how accurate you are, if they don't trust you, it won't matter. So I think whatever you're doing, all of those attributes and skills have to lead to developing trust.
All right, fantastic. Catherine?
Just to emphasize more a little bit about the trust, I think the ability to, you mentioned empathy, Shane, and I think that's a good word. I would sometimes I'm not sure how everyone views that word, but one of the ways that I would define it is being able to put yourself in someone else's viewpoint. And if you can do that, then you're going to see what their arguments are going to be. You're going to understand what their needs are. You're going to figure out what they don't know, what they haven't learned, and what your job is to teach them. And you're also going to see that in a two-way, like, what can I learn from the community? What is it that they are wanting that we're not providing? And why is that we're not figuring that out? So that's the only thing I would.
All right, well, that's great. All right, well, cool. Let's move on to our next slide. And the idea of this decision architect came up, and I want to keep us on time, so I'm not going to dwell on the slide other than to reiterate that there is some work we've been doing recently, and I have to say we did not plan this, but our panelists brought up a number of great points that are reflected in some other content we have. So if you're like, well, that all sounds good, how do I start developing all those skills? I have put in the chat furiously a whole bunch of links that you can look at. So I'm going to just kind of briefly review what those are, so you're oriented to what is I just put in there. So we have got number one, at the top, the budget officer's decision architect paper, very recently produced, which Heidi was referring to, that really parallels quite closely a lot of the skills that our panelists brought up. Catherine brought up equity. So we have our series on fairness that one of our past presidents declared it the series that every public servant should read. So if you're looking to get up to speed on these concepts, I would recommend you check that out. And we also recently did finish an evaluation of a project GFW did to work with 11 cities on putting an equity lens on budgeting and what the lessons were from that. So it's very, I would call it in-depth and nuanced take on that topic. So that is actually off to the printer as of today. So that will be out to the world pretty soon. And just a couple other things there. We've got the Rethinking Revenue and Rethinking Budgeting general links for those programs that Ron mentioned. And then two more is I think, it was Catherine that was saying, like, if you can kind of put yourself in someone else's shoes, that's a good skill to have. And maybe coincidentally, we have a program called Perspectives, which is all about doing that. It is arguably GFOA's most evidence-based training, where we took an experimental approach to developing and proving this out. So it's the folks that have gone through it have had very good reviews and very good results. So I would recommend checking that out. And then lastly, we have our code of ethics, which the panelists brought up this idea of trust multiple times. Our code of ethics is 100% oriented around the idea of improving your reputation for trustworthiness. So that webpage has a number of proven practices for doing just that. And we have a few other things on the horizon that need just the time I won't spend more time talking about because I want our panelists to do more of the talking and less me. So with that, let's move on to our next question, which is going to be, what is your best advice for smart risk-taking when growing in your career? And Heidi, you're going to kick us off on these two questions as well. It's the additional question there. What can you start doing right now to prepare yourself for smart risk taking?
I hate to say it depends, but it depends on the risk you want to take. I know Catherine is going to talk later about moving into general management. But the one thing I would say is I think sometimes we delegate our career development to somebody else by almost unconsciously, by thinking, well, when he or she retires, if you're an assistant, when the finance director retires, then I'm just going to move into that position, which may or may not happen. They may or may not retire. I know some people have talked about retiring for 15 years and they don't. So my first piece of advice is take charge of your career. Have some ideas of some things that you might be interested in. Think about it actively and think about what, if you see a job that's out there that's not quite within your reach, what are the things that you can develop to make you ready for that next step in your career? So I think that active thinking really matters a lot. And as I was pondering this question, it made me think of, for those of you in Illinois, the former Lake County CFO, Gary Gordon, who's now the CFO of the Shed Aquarium and has been for a number of years. That was an interesting transition, from a very, very important role in county government to a very, very important role in a large nonprofit. I don't know if he did this on purpose or not, but he had some extra duties when he was in Lake County that involved facilities and capital work. He had those opportunities, and I am certain that those helped him when he applied for the Shed Aquarium job. So I think it's important to think about where you might want to go and what are some of the things as you look at it that might help you get there, and even taking that opportunity to talk with someone who has that job and find that out. And that will help you understand, is that something I really want to do or not? For example, if you are thinking about growing in management, take on a larger interdepartmental, cross-departmental project to see if you really do like working with police, fire, public works, HR, in all of these different elements, other than just working with them on their budget. So, look for those opportunities to stretch yourself a bit when you think about the next step in your career. But the most important thing is don't hand your career path. Like, I had a village manager once who encouraged me to stay. I had an opportunity and he encouraged me to stay. I still applied for the job, and I was glad I did, because 3 weeks later he left. It's kind of a rotten thing to do, to encourage me to stay in the organization that he already knew he was leaving. And even those people who you think might have your best interest at heart may or may not. And so keep your own counsel, chart your own path. If it feels like the right thing to do, then I would move on it. And I'll stop there and throw it to my colleagues.
I would suggest a couple of strategies. Number one, the tendency is to often look at what your next step is and to focus on that. I kind of alluding to part of what Heidi said, I really would suggest you look at it and say, okay, where do I want to be in 10 years with my career? Now, what are the steps? Go backwards from there. Start with the vision, for lack of a better description, and say, this is where I want to get to. Now, what are the right steps to get me there? So that's number one. The second piece of advice I would give is to pay close attention to the track record and trajectory of people who have been in the position before that you were looking at. The simple fact that certain managers, county managers, city managers, other CEOs are launching pads for careers, and certain ones are graveyards. City councils are the same way. I would much rather come into an organization that is deeply troubled to be able to work for a manager who is a rock star and has come in to lead a turnaround than to go into an organization that is very stable and healthy, but working for a manager who is not somebody that's going to help advance my career. So kind of going to the two ends of the extreme, think 10 years out, and then pay close attention to the reputation of the person you're going to work for. And in particular, if you're going in to work for a city or county manager, you want to work for somebody who is really investing in helping their team succeed individually as well as their organization. When I was city manager in Garland, 13 city managers in the Dallas-Fort Worth area had all come through the City of Lubbock organization. It was a remarkable, because that manager he took pride in raising up that next generation of leaders. There's another organization I'm familiar with that their team members, he has some outstanding team members, well-managed organization. They will never submit a resume for a position, even if it's a great move for them and we really think they're a good match, because their manager will hold it against them if they apply. That's not the kind of manager that's going to help you get to where you want to be in 10 years.
Awesome. Catherine, anything you'd like to add?
Just another thought about what you could do right now to prepare for risk taking. And, this is very personal. So you have to figure out whether you're ready, what you think is a good, what's an area you're afraid of might be a good way. Like, I love this part of my job and I'm really afraid of this part of my job. So find a way to do something small in that area that you're afraid of, and engage other people in the organization to help you with that. You don't have to do it by yourself. And if it's not your boss, maybe it's a colleague, maybe it's a peer, maybe it's another director.
That's great. And here's a question that came up that I think fits here, meaning this section of our webinar as well as anywhere. And this is about the time period for your career. So meaning the question is, what would be a reasonable normal, if there is such a thing, period of time for moving from entry level to CFO? So as you're kind of, I think you guys mentioned taking a long-term view of one's career, like, if you're planning this out, what would be, if like you are not a CFO now, what would be like kind of a time period that would be a reasonable expectation for people to hold, if in fact you think that is a good thing to do?
I think it's a good question. I think it's hard to have a reasonable answer. So for example, somebody who is moving every 2 years in a steadily upward trajectory with the support and encouragement of their bosses looks very different than somebody late career who has spent their whole career moving every 2 years, or somebody who's moving laterally. It also matters what size organization, complex. So I wish there was a simple answer to that. It's a very messy answer because it really is situation specific.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I see some head nods from Catherine and Heidi. So if you guys are comfortable with that, we can move forward. So the next question, Ron, I believe you're going to take the lead on this one for us. And the question is, what special or unique opportunities does a tight labor market present for quote unquote sellers? And here referring to what was said earlier on, that Heidi brought up, that we are in a market where finance officers are in demand. So you are sellers of labor and there is a tight market for this. So go ahead.
Absolutely. 2 or 3 things. Number one, it reduces the odds that you need to make a move into a crummy organization because it's your next logical step. In other words, you have more options, so you need to be pickier about the vitality and the political functionality of a given organization. Generally speaking, organizations and communities develop cultures, and if they are dysfunctional, they may have eras of aberration in which they get functional, but they'll usually go back to what they were like. If they've been well functioning, they may have periods of dysfunction, but they'll tend to go back to their normative. So the first special or unique opportunity is that you have more options to make wise decisions. Number two is that you're in a better negotiating position, because the reality is, in any position that particularly competes with the private sector, there is upward pressure on salaries and compensation and benefits. So you're actually in a better position to negotiate a more attractive offer. The other thing is, and this is slow transition I'm seeing, but is the ability to negotiate more creative work conditions. I had one city manager not too long ago call me about a CFO search, and she literally said, I don't care where they work from. They can work remote. Well, that wouldn't have been said a really short period ago. So if what's holding you back is you're going, oh gosh, I would love to move. I'm ready to move. I think I'm ready with my skills, but my son or my daughter doesn't graduate for another 2 years. That no longer is the kind of barrier it was previously. So it's really opening up some possibilities. And what I would urge in terms of being tuned into those, one of the really good, bad things about local government is, generally speaking, we lag the private sector by about 5 years in the utilization of new processes, new ways of doing business, et cetera. The bad part is we're always behind, but the good part is, if you pay attention to workforce trends in the private sector, it will help clue you in what are the things you can take advantage of, what unique opportunities does it create in this tight labor market, because the elected officials, generally speaking, when they're sitting and talking, they're bringing their corporate background to bear, and what becomes acceptable inside a government organization is what those one or more of those elected officials has already become normative inside their corporate setting. And that's how the acceptance tends to grow. So those are the suggestions I would make in terms of identifying some special or unique opportunities in a tight labor market.
That's great. Heidi or Catherine, anything you would like to add to that?
I think I saw a question in the chat briefly that I might just add to what Ron is saying. And that is, how do you know if you're going? I think the best advice I could give anyone in any profession is it matters more who you work for than anything else, because that person above you controls your work. They control whether or not they have more control than most other folks. It's more important than how much money you make. It's more important than what your job title is. I think it's just really important. And so doing more research, finding out more about the person that you might be working for, unless you're working for an elected body, I think is a great way to really be pickier, that Ron was talking about. Really spend some time finding out where did the people go that worked there before? What do they think? I mean, it's amazing to me how few people contact former people that worked for someone as part of their job search, and it's so enlightening. So that's what I would add.
The only other thing I would suggest is, I think that because employers are so anxious to find talent in public finance, I think they're more open to questions. When you have a chance to ask them questions in the interview, to ask about the culture of the organization, if they don't have a good answer to that, that means they probably haven't thought about it. And that's likely, to Catherine's point, it's probably not a good sign. So you want to understand, what's their culture? What's their philosophy on professional development? what are the opportunities, for advancement, all those kinds of things. I think that maybe a few years ago, people would start to get a little skittish if you had those questions. I think it's fair game now to ask, and because it shows that you want to make sure that this job aligns with your goals, your objectives, and more importantly, as Catherine and Ron have said, your ability to succeed and be happy in your job. Because sometimes you can succeed, but you really don't like the environment that you're in. It's toxic or whatever. Your boss is not supportive. So those kinds of things can help enlighten you about the opportunity.
Yeah, and so maybe if I hear you guys correctly, one of the opportunities of a tight labor market is the chance to really almost interview your employer about some of these questions, like to kind of right to the questioner in our chat was, how do you know if the person you are considering working for meets the qualifications you are talking about? Is you have the affordances to just essentially ask in today's labor market.
And to build on that, Shane, one of the things that's common with city managers that does not appear to be as common with finance directors, city managers will routinely call their colleagues to find out, what is this city council like? What, are they broken? Are they as, as good as they appear on camera and it's rotten behind scenes, or are they as bad as they appear on camera, or whatever it happens to be? Finance directors ought to do the same thing and call their colleague finance directors and say, what's the scoop behind the scenes? Because you generally know what's going on in your immediate area. You may not have 100% accurate take on any given situation, but if you get the same smoke from multiple places, you've got pretty high confidence that smoke actually reflects fire.
That's great. All right, well, thank you all. That's excellent advice. Let's move on to our next poll question. So Tammy, if you would be so kind as to raise our next poll question, and we'll just hear from folks about where folks are at. And that poll question is under consideration. Why don't we move on to the next slide? And so the next slide here is about moving into management and what you see as the pro cons of moving from finance to a more general management role. Now, of course, we here at GFOA recognize that the finance office is, of course, at the apex of all public service. So there are a few misguided souls that want to move on to general management. But so for those people, we are going to cover this question. And so, Catherine, I believe you're going to help us out on understanding what some of the considerations are here. And by the way, before we do, I'll just end the poll and share the results so Catherine will have this context as she is thinking. And there we go. So we've got kind of a pretty good mix of, we've got a fair number of folks looking at general management and different levels here. So I think we've still got a pretty wide variety of interests. So with that in mind, Catherine, take us away.
Great. Well, I would say some of the pros of going into general management, and what I mean by that, obviously, and what I think we're all talking about is, assistant manager, administrator, et cetera, those positions, obviously it can be a step forward. It can help you financially. It may give you a little more control of the decision making, at least of the recommendation. So I think that, the autonomy might go up a little bit. And it also, sometimes if you're doing it within the same place, it can be upward mobility without leaving. It can be a great time to really flex those decision architect skills, but with elected officials more directly than you might if you're working through a manager or administrator. And also just really, I think what keeps so many of us in local government is just the ability to make a difference and, really having a little bit more maybe control over that. The cons, I think, it is definitely, we've talked a little bit more about kind of the public scrutiny and the fishbowl, and finance directors are in that too, but they might not be in it 24/7, 365. There might be times when they step into that and maybe can step out. And so there is, I think, more continued scrutiny. Also, every decision that's made, if a mistake is made, if it's not financial, probably not going to blame the finance director. Every bad decision made or every bad thing that happens might blame the manager. So, just understanding that what might seem like you have more control, you might not actually have as much control as you think. And I think the ability to deal with that ambiguity is a really important skill to learn as you move into those roles. And then just literally the difficulty of working for multiple bosses. If you're working not just for one person, one professional, hopefully, but multiples, it's just a whole different ballgame. And they change over time, really at any election, and sometimes at other times too. So the ability to have some stability might change, not just because your bosses might change and what might be going on in the organization, but there's less job security. There's no one between you and those elected officials. And then I guess the other question I would just say that could be a con, and it's really a question, is what do you like to do? Because you really need to think about what you want to do kind of day to day. So that's what I would say about that. And I'm sure Heidi and Ron have good things to add.
I would first give you a book that you ought to read called Rocket Fuel. And Rocket Fuel is actually written not for finance professionals, but for small businesses, for entrepreneurs. And at the heart of it, we actually had a consultant with SGR that said, y'all need to read this book. And we read it, and it was profoundly significant to us. At the heart of it, Jennifer, who's our COO, former city manager, and I could not be more different. And the book Rocket Fuel created an understanding architecture that you need both a visionary and what they call an integrator to have that, as they describe it, it's rocket fuel when you have both of those together. The application of that is that for this setting is that more often than not, a CFO who's moving into general management is what that particular book calls an integrator. It's the one that's able to do the hard-nosed analysis and go, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense, etc. What you've got to have is both of those players. So if you go in and are a great team member with the opposite of whatever you are, that's where magic happens. But if you go in and are working closely with somebody who is identical to what you are, that's when you begin to have blind spots and stuff blows up on you. And so number one is you need to pay more attention as you start looking at going into general management of the profile of who you're going to be working with and going, okay, is this really the right match for it to be power packed? Will the two of us together be rocket fuel, or will we reinforce our own blind spots? And the tendency, our human tendency, is to look for working with somebody who looks at everything just like I do. And so what happens is our human tendency pulls us to go work for the wrong person. Number two is I would strongly urge a strong self-understanding of where your sweet spot is, similar but different than the rocket fuel thing. Finance folks, by and large, have spent a career thinking logically. City managers tend to spend all day, every day, mastering the art of illogic and making illogic look logical for public consumption, even as they know it's illogic. Well, those are two real different dynamics. And so you've got to really understand where, back to Heidi's point, where you're going to be happy. And what I found is that so many department heads, not just finance, move into city management. And to Catherine's point, whereas a department head, they actually had a lot more control over their agenda, their priorities, their vision as a department head than they for sure did as an assistant city manager. and to a large degree, even as a city manager, because the role of even the city manager is to help the council achieve their vision. And so lots of department heads become one gig city managers, not because of ability, but because they get there and they're miserable. They're going, I'm not having the fun I was having before, and I'm getting abused every day. So really take the time to develop a high degree of self-understanding and really develop that sense of, here's how. In fact, we use an assessment tool called IOPT on how you process information. And again, Jennifer and I are at opposite points. We'll do that for free for anybody on the call. If you want to take that assessment and raise your self-understanding of how you process information and how it would fit in, just shoot me an email. We'll be glad to do that, because it will help you plug in, whether you're in a search we're doing, Catherine's doing, Heidi's doing, or anybody else. The more self-understanding you have, the more success you're going to have in wherever you land.
Thanks, Ron. Well, maybe Ron, you could put the information in the chat of where people should do that if they're interested. And Heidi, did you have anything you want to add to this question?
Just briefly, I mean, we don't want to scare you off from the city management profession, because we need dedicated, smart people who want to do this work. So I think everything that's been said is absolutely true. And what kept running through my mind is, as a city manager, you just have to be willing to accept the community's will, the elected officials' will, when it may not be what you think is the best decision, or it may not be what the data says is the best decision, because we have to remember where this form of government came from and what our role is to do. You know, that's our role. And if you have to just be able to let go. And the last thing on the letting go piece, I've known some finance directors who've become city managers, and they haven't been able to let go of the budget or let go of the finance piece. And they've driven their new finance directors crazy, because they're still doing the finance work. So you have to have an honest conversation with yourself about the ability to let go, and maybe let go to someone who's going to do it differently than you used to do it. So can you really let go of that thing that you built, particularly if you're moving within the organization, and make sure that you're able to do that comfortably, so that you're happy and that your future finance director is happy.
All right. Well, thanks so much. So maybe just two things before I move on to the next slide is, number one, if you do move up to city management and you don't like it, GFA will take you back, so no worries there. So take some risks, it's fine. And next, the third point on this slide, what if your idea of career advancement is not management, which I think is interesting, because the idea here, we've been framing advancement as moving up, if you will, the kind of hierarchy. And well, what if that's not your thing? Because, like, you know, our panelists have said, like, you have to know what makes you happy. So that is going to lead on to our next question. And I think this one might be also of particular interest to our retiree friends on the call, is what are the most intriguing non-standard career opportunities right now? And Catherine, I think you're going to lead us off on this one.
Sure. I'm excited to hear what others have to say on this. I think a few things that I see, of course, I think just the role of the finance director, whether you're calling it a finance director or whether it's a CFO, that evolution of what that position is very exciting. In the right organizations and with the right players, I think it is not like it used to be. And I think if you're in the right organization, you could make that position into that much more strategic role and give up some of that day-to-day, which might be, so that's not really non-traditional, but I do think that it's a real big opportunity for folks. And it's also a big opportunity for those under you. I think also there are a lot of larger organizations that are looking at debt management. There are so many enormous infrastructure needs that are coming due, 50-year needs, 25-year needs, 100-year needs. And I think there's going to be much more of an emphasis on debt management and also partnering with other entities. I'm working with the city right now, and the finance director there is looking at an enormous multidisciplinary project that includes federal, state, all these different players. And I think there are roles like that, whether they're in local government, another public entity, that are really important. And I would put in that category when people are trying to get multi-jurisdictional issues addressed, whether it's an amenity like a trail system, or their stormwater. I mean, there's just so our jurisdictional lines don't mean anything to what's actually happening geographically in our community sometimes. So I think that is a big opportunity. Looking at I think there's also an opportunity in the future as more AI and more positions that are routinized go away or done differently. There's a real opportunity to figure out what is sort of the cost benefit of the way we have been currently delivering services and what that level of service is. I think that's a real opportunity. I can't put a job description name on that, but I think that is a real opportunity that's coming. And whether that's at a regional government that's looking at that, or whether it's within a larger organization where they're kind of looking at that systematically within their jurisdiction, I think that is. I also think there's a lot of opportunity with external public sector partners that could really benefit from someone that understands how local governments work. Many things are not being done by local governments. Lots of states have tons of kind of carved up ways that they deliver services. So whether that's an authority or some other public entity or a nonprofit partner that's taking on what traditionally used to be a local government need, I think there are huge opportunities there. And then I think there's also an opportunity in looking at economic equity right now. I think many of us, the local government and public sector is always behind. Seems like in some of these leading issues, and one of those, we've talked a little bit about kind of DEI, that equity lens, not just from a financial standpoint, but from an economic development standpoint. We've done a recruitment for an organization that was looking at economic equity. So a different lens than maybe a traditional chief equity officer, and maybe a good partner with that person. So that's what I would say are a few things that come to mind as non-standard.
Fantastic. Heidi?
Yeah, those are good. Those are great. I totally agree with all of those things. A couple of the things that come to mind is, and I think we see young people going into data management, metrics, and Catherine touched on that with how we deliver services. And there's some cities, I know Alexandria has one, Cincinnati used to. I don't think there's as robust as it used to be, because the city manager who championed it left and it just didn't continue. So what scares me is there's some really smart young people who are very skilled in data management. And if we don't harness their abilities, they're going to go to the private sector. And I've been working with a few of them, and I don't want to lose them because they have a public sector passion. So I think we need to look for ways to harness their talent, and anyone else who wants to go into that. The other thing I would just mention, over the years, I've done a lot of work with GASB, and I know for many of you that's a 4-letter word, but it is, if you think down the road, you might want to be involved with GASB or other organizations like that. It's good to get involved with partner organizations like volunteering, like in GFOA and in your state GFOA right now. Start getting on committees and thinking about things, in a broader context. First of all, it's good for your career development, because you're going to meet more people and you're going to pick up some great information, but it will help you down the road if you do decide that you want to, come out of the hardcore public sector and maybe move into one of these other organizations. Because I sometimes get candidates that the first time they're applying, they've never had anything to do with that organization, and there's been opportunities. So look for those chances to serve on a committee and participate in a broader discussion. And it may lead to a different kind of career option down the road.
I'll just add one of our questions in the came up, best ways to network with other finance officers. I would humbly, I guess, suggest that GFOA is a pretty good option, and we have all sorts of committee and volunteer opportunities. So if you're interested, GFOA can help you out. Ron, anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, totally agree with everything Heidi and Catherine said. I'm going to take just a slightly different angle with this question. I think that the world is changing so rapidly, and I really and truly believe with all my heart that in the finance arena, and I'm going to broaden that to in the local government arena, nobody is doing a better job of anticipating both where the world is headed and where the world needs to head with regard to local government finance than GFOA. Pay attention to what GFOA is doing, lean into it, throw your heart into it in all of those initiatives, because by doing that, if you focus instead of just the outside opportunities, if you say, I'm going to pour myself into where local government finance needs to go and where GFOA is taking it, the opportunities will both appear and transform how you view everything, which is what will open up opportunities that you don't expect. So I really believe with all my heart that what GFOA is doing is telegraphing what you need to be doing to be out there for the future. So throw your heart into it, get engaged with that, and the opportunities will just happen. And the one little catchphrase I would leave you with in that regard is to think about transitioning your role from the more traditional transactional role of local government finance into a transformational role. In other words, how do you make yourself and your function more central to the mission instead of to a set of tasks? And that's exactly what GFOA is doing. So if you'll throw your heart into that, if you get good at going where GFOA is telegraphing the world needs to go with local government finance, your market value is going to go up, your influence is going to go up, and your opportunities are going to expand.
All right. Well, thank you, Ron. I'm very tempted just to end it on that note, but we have a couple questions here that I want to address, and I hope folks are okay going to a little bonus time if you've got to sign off. Totally appreciate that. But two questions that came up, they're sort of like personal career advice questions, but I think they have broader lessons for everybody. And I'm going to pose these in. If one of you want to jump in and take the lead, we'll go with that. So the first question is, after spending 20 plus years in local government / budget finance and working my way up to management, I finally got the opportunity to take a leadership position. Unfortunately, less than 3 months after taking the job of my dreams, my position was eliminated without any notice. I've never faced a situation like this before. I've been feeling less confident about my future and thinking that taking another leadership position is perhaps too risky. So this is, I think, kind of a confidence question when it comes to like career advice, and maybe it speaks a little bit to our, that second question we had about like taking smart risks, but this person like kind of once bitten, twice shy problem here. Maybe you all someone want to speak to this?
All right, I'll jump in since neither Catherine or there's Catherine open. I just say a couple of things. Number one, make sure you are clear-eyed in your self-analysis. Really have a brutal, objective self-assessment of what you may or may not have contributed to that dynamic. And then the second thing I would say is focus on transparency. If you did something that stumped your toe, when you're looking at the next job, be very open and say, here's what happened, and here's what I learned, and here's what I'm doing to not let it happen again. Generally speaking, employers are a whole lot more interested in your emotional intelligence than whether you stumped your toe.
And I would say that this is before I got into recruiting, I just thought, it was very rare that people stayed in a job 3 months or they got fired. And then it is so much more common than you think. People don't talk about it as much, but if you spend as much time looking at resumes as the three of us have had, some of the most successful people we know have had that experience that you've had. And they've learned from it, and they've put it behind them, and they've moved on and looked forward. So I think it's very common. It happens. We all have missteps, and I wouldn't let it hold you back. But as Ron said, learn from it. There's career coaching available. I do it through ICMA, Career Connect. So sign up for that. I'm happy to talk with you, or just email me after this. But it's sadly not unusual, and I think both in the public and the private sectors.
All right, fantastic. And Heidi, if you wouldn't mind then putting your email in the chat for folks. And Catherine, please. Oh, Catherine, did you have something to add?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm also happy to talk to anyone. I'm sure, I'm sure all of us would. And, you get to define what you learn from this, and you get to define what's going to happen. And that's, I think, how you can regain your confidence and can take control back in that situation. You can't control the past, but you have more control of the future than you think.
Cool. All right. And then one more kind of, I think, question about kind of, we'll call it personal career advice. I think will be relevant for lots of folks, especially our entry-level friends here. As someone who has worked in government finance for 21 plus years, how should one go about trying to land that first management position? All job postings want management or supervisor experience, but without the opportunity to either. How does one build their abilities to do the role? So in other words, like kind of you need experience to get the job. How does one get the experience, right? And like kind of they're finding this experience requirement very frustrating. So perhaps, and also for those of you patiently waiting for the CPE code, I'll put that up there. There it is. And for everyone else who wants to hear the answer to this question, who would like to take a cut at that?
I'll just start, I guess. I'm trying to make the requirements less. I think over the last 30 years, we just built and built and built requirements, and it's ridiculous. 30 years ago, you didn't have to have that much experience. You can find lots of examples of it. So I'm trying to put in all of ours that it says something more like supervisory and management, because you can manage lots of things. It is different than managing day-to-day people. You will learn that when you manage day-to-day people, but everyone learns it. So I also would say, don't be discouraged and wait until you have every single thing that you see in the preferred and the minimum requirements. Apply anyway, make your best case. I think that's, and there are some very practical things that you can do right now to manage projects, to manage a process, to manage something externally, to manage something that needs to be done in your organization. That's, I think, the best thing is find what needs to be done, what management needs to happen, and then try to do it. Be enacting, take over when someone's on maternity leave. There's really lots of opportunities, and then you can build that into what you put in your resume.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've often advocated that it's tougher to get something done. You have to collaborate across teams, and you don't have direct authority over someone. So focusing on those things that you've accomplished through informal leadership, I think maybe can help, if you highlight those in your resume, it can help them see that you really have those skills. You just haven't had the chance to utilize them in a formal setting.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say, echoing, talk to the recruiter. It is not unusual that dumb stuff gets in a profile over the recommendation of the recruiter. That you've got a very transactional HR director, and by golly, we require 7 years and blah, blah, blah. And the recruiter is saying, I don't think you really, and they got put it in there, because if you go ahead and apply, if you've talked to the recruiter, at the end of the day, everything always depends on what the field looks like. And so if it's a small field, the recruiter has more latitude to sit down with the city or the employer and to be able to say, I really like what I see in this person, even though they don't have 7 years. But if you don't ever jump in, it's the old Wayne Gretzky deal. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And then visit with the recruiter, and you may go through several of them where when you visit with the recruiter, they say, yeah, you just didn't have enough experience because they were really dug in on it, or because there were 50 people with that kind of experience. But to some degree, it's a playing the numbers game. You've got to be out playing to be able to have the right one hit. But talk to the recruiter. Actually have live conversations with them. They'll welcome that, and they'll help guide you. If you're not a great match for that one, they also will help guide you. Here's what you need to be doing to prepare for the next one to come along, or here's one that maybe is a better match for you that you can be more competitive with.
All right, well, fantastic. And I see in the chat our new intern, Max, is modeling the behavior that you are recommending of taking on more responsibility by answering the questions that are up there. So that takes care of my job. So with that, I want to thank everybody here for their time and attention, including our 3 excellent and expert panelists. So thank you, everyone, today for great insights, and look forward to chatting with you again in the future.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you.
Y'all have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.